Sudan has plunged into war between the Sudanese army led by General Al-Fattah Burhan and the Rapid Support Forces, which began as a force under the umbrella of the army and which has since transformed with the help of the UAE into a militia led by Mohammed Hamdan Doglo, more widely known as Hemedti, and his brother. The reason war has broken out is because the army chief Burhan has sought to merge Hemedti's militia with the army, a move that Hemedti knows would clip his wings and take his power away. But it's more complex than that. It's not just that Hemedti is angry that Burhan wants to clip his wings, but also the reason why Burhan wants to do it. The army chief Burhan has been under significant pressure to hand over power to the Forces for Freedom and Change, a group of civilian parties made up of leftist parties, the Communist Party and the Ummah Party once led by the late Sadiq al-Mahdi, and which enjoys international backing from Washington and the like. Burhan has reneged on agreements signed with them to hand over power. The reason Burhan refuses to hand over power to the Forces for Freedom and Change is twofold. Firstly, he wants to rule. Secondly, when the civilian parties had the chance to push for elections when al-Bashir was toppled, they didn't. In fact, the civilian parties instead insisted on the opposite, that elections should not be held because they feared that the Islamists would most likely win. And so they instead entered into a deal in which Burhan would rule for 2 years and then he would hand over power to them without elections, and they would then rule for years under a so-called transition and embark on sweeping changes to the nation and the state without a mandate. When 2 years passed, Burhan not only refused to hand over power, but he toppled the government, released some Islamists from prison, and then threatened to hold elections if the international powers forced him to hand over power. In a panic, the US, UAE and civilian parties entered into new negotiations with Burhan. Last November, Burhan was pressured into an agreement to hand over power. To navigate himself out of it, he insisted that civilian participation be expanded to include more civilian parties, essentially diluting the power of the Forces for Freedom and Change. In their frustration, they began to rally around Hemedti on the basis that Hemedti could be convinced to use his militia to take power himself and then hand power over to them without elections. This is why Burhan in February announced that Hemedti's militia should be merged with the army, and Hemedti has reacted by launching a coup instead.